Okay, good evening, everyone, and thank you for attending. This is the Radio Club of America interview series. I'm Tim Duffy, K3LR. I'm President Emeritus of the Radio Club of America, and with me tonight is Barney Scholl, who is General Counsel for the Radio Club. Thank you for being here, Barney, to help out. And our guest this evening is Marilyn Ward. And Marilyn, let's start out with tell us about going to college and then how you got your start and your first part of your career and how things all came together, and then interweave it with NIPSTIC.
Well, I started out actually after I got married working at an insurance company, and one of my best friends was a highway patrol trooper, and he told me I was 20 years old, and he told me that they needed dispatchers really bad at the highway patrol, and I was in Fort Lauderdale at the time. So I went over there and applied, and I didn't have any experience, didn't know how to do any typing or anything, but they were very short-handed, and they hired me and put me through their training program. Within the first 2 months of being alone, they put me on midnight shift, and the plane went down in the Everglades in Fort Lauderdale, and that was probably one of the craziest experiences for me. Is now, by then I was 21 years old, and I really loved it. My husband and I decided to move to Central Florida. I was in Fort Lauderdale at the time, so I tried to transfer up in the highway patrol, and this is back in the 1973 era, 72. And they didn't hire lady troopers up in the area, or lady dispatchers up in the area, or troopers actually. So I went around and applied all the way down into the Orlando area from Lake County where I lived. And I ended up getting a job at the Orlando Police Department, answering phones initially. So I started doing that. We didn't have any computers in those days. We didn't have any 911. We didn't have any of those things. And I spent my time there jumping up to a map where I wasn't from Orlando at the time. So it was quite an experience trying to figure out where to send people to calls. So we can see the difference now when you have a computer that's telling you what district it is you have to send them to and giving you all this information, when we were like on a map with our finger trying to figure out where an address was. And then one of our folks decided to try coming up with a list of addresses in like a Rolodex, except for it was a huge flip chart that we used. And we had to try to get districts and stuff assigned to that. That was since I was on the midnight shift, that was a great project for us to do on the midnight shift. And I ended up going into training and to be a dispatcher. And I really enjoyed that a lot. And I decided at the time there were more women that were starting to become police officers. And so I thought, well, I think I'll go to the academy. And I stayed on in communications and went to the academy while I was still in communications, and became a part-time officer for several years until that's how I kind of got interested in it. And at the time, we had a whole different type of a structure within communications. We had some police officers, they would put the people who were on light duty assigned to the center. So we had some people, the dispatchers primarily, and one or two per shift were non-sworn people that were not police officers. And then we had police officers that worked, in those days they had desk sergeants, and the desk sergeant was assigned into communications to supervise all of us. So I did that for years, and then they made a change and decided to start using civilian people, non-sworn people, in the leadership positions also. And one of the folks that got put in charge used to be the clerk of the court. And in Florida, they changed the court system, and he was in charge of all the judges and all the court system for the city of Orlando. So they moved him into communications because they had no other place for him when they dissolved the courts. And that's how I ended up getting promoted into a supervisory level. And at that point, he's the one who introduced me to APCO. And I started going to APCO conferences. And back in those days, that was in the 1980s, there was not very much training going on at the conference. It was really more of a social activity, going to all of the different APCO conferences. And so a friend of mine from Gainesville that I had met at an APCO meeting, we started creating training for telecommunicators, which there was none back in those days. And so that just progressed to me kind of getting very involved with the whole APCO process and going through the board of APCO for the state of Florida. And I stayed very involved with the city of Orlando was very good to me, allowing me to travel around the state and do training. 2020 came and interviewed me. Tom Gerald, from those of you who have been around watching 2020 for a while, Tom Gerald came to Orlando, and they did one of their sessions on 2020 about the training that we were providing for our telecommunicators. We created a simulator, which they had never done. We never had anything like that for operators. So I did that for quite some time and ended up starting to go to the national conferences for APCO. And there were no ladies involved with the leadership of APCO International either. And several people approached me and asked me if I would run for the national board. And I ended up doing that in '92. And that's how I got involved with how we started NIPSTIC. While I was on the APCO board, the FCC put together the PISWAC process. In that process, that were going to be happening in the future. So we from the APCO perspective, we put together a group, a task force of people from around the country. We had 7 of us that started going and traveling around the country and coming up with requirements. In those days, we weren't thinking of a nationwide broadband network. In those days, we thought we were going to head towards wideband and 700 megahertz. So we went around the country, and we found that we had people in the room that were a lot of industry people. We had federal people, we had state people, we had military people, we had local people, and we found that we really found a lot of synergy working together, and we created what is now the PISWAC report. And when we got through with that, the chairman's office, we met with them regularly, and he said, "Did you like doing that?" And of course I said yes. It was a week out of our life every month, doing that for a year, but it certainly was worthwhile. And he said, "Well, is there any way that you can keep up everybody talking to each other?" So I said, "Well, I'll check around with the guys and see what they say." And so we had a first kind of meeting in Bob Gerst's office, the APCO attorney, and talked with the different people. We had a lot of federal people there too, and we decided to come together and form a federation, which is a federation of volunteers. And that became what we are today, that is NIPSTIC. That was in 1995. And I was still at the Orlando Police Department. By then I had been promoted over the years and was the manager of the 911 and radio and all of that. So because I had a lot of flexibility there, I was able to get NIPSTIC started. We had everybody was a volunteer, and that's how we got going. We started out just looking at the FCC and what does the FCC asking of public safety, what do we think? We focused on the PISWAC report because we talked about additional spectrum for public safety, and we kind of used that report to continue to go to the FCC and talk about trying to get more spectrum for public safety. And that was a long time ago, and we're still together. NIPSTIC is still together. We're very fortunate that a gentleman by the name of David Boyd, who at the time worked for the Department of Justice, he was very interested in having this federation, because never before had you had 15, 16, national organizations that came together to try to find consensus. And so he provided some staff support for us through the Department of Justice, and he ended up transferring over to when Homeland Security was created, our support for many years until, he retired, and we had many years of probably 20 years or so of actual secretarial and travel support that was provided by the federal government. Then a few years ago, they reorganized and they really started focusing on cybersecurity and research projects. And so we did not get federal funding. I guess it's been 3 years now. So we created a foundation, the NIPSTIC Foundation. And that NIPSTIC Foundation's sole goal is to try to get donations. So we're a nonprofit, created a nonprofit. So we have two organizations now, NIPSTIC, the Federation, which is volunteers. Everybody comes together the same as we always have. And then we have a separate organization, the NIPSTIC Foundation, which is a nonprofit that is trying to support stuff for the NIPSTIC Foundation. So that's kind of where we're at today. We started out strongly in the radio side, obviously, at 911, and NINA and APCO just kept growing and growing. So we did back off on 911 throughout the years because we had, two of our members, both of them are members, that were working on those issues. And today we have a cybersecurity group. We certainly are engaged in broadband. We wrote the statement of requirements for broadband for the initial network that you now know as FirstNet, and participated. A lot of our members are all involved with FirstNet, obviously, on the PSAC and board members. And we've just kind of been the pushers from the back. And our members have been the faces of the work that we're doing. So it's been a good opportunity for people to come together and really, so we don't have consensus on, and primarily stick with the things that we have consensus on. Oh, I can't hear you.
I'm sorry. Marilyn, let's go back to your time at APCO. So this was before NIPSTIC, right?
Yes, actually, when I was president of APCO is when we put together NIPSTIC.
Right. So you're president of APCO. How many members? What was going on at that time, just before you led the charge to go to NIPSTIC? What was going on at APCO? I mean, what were the big projects that you were leading and working on?
Well, we had several projects. Project 25 was certainly up and running, and we were back and forth on Project 25. There was a lot of, depending on what was being developed, there was a lot of push from different places. It was a really political deal of everybody's time. So I wasn't engaged with that. I wasn't leading that. Greg Jorgensen, who was past president of APCO, was very engaged in that. Jimmy Downs from the federal side. We had a lot of people that were involved with us that were also involved with that. I got really involved with the frequency coordinators because prior to NIPSTIC, the frequency coordinators, there was a lot of tension between the frequency coordinators. There were 4 frequency coordinators within public safety. And there was a lot of competition going on because the FCC decided that we needed to be in competition with one another. And so I was very engaged with, when I was the president, very engaged with the public safety coordinators also. I used to attend their meetings and tried to bring them together. Part of when we were starting to decide maybe we need a formal organization, that we started with, thinking that what might be all the PSCC, that they were working the four of them together, but we were trying to get them to maybe expand that a little bit. So we weren't successful totally with doing that. However, we were able to bring in all of these other groups, and the coordinators then joined us. Richard DeMello, who now we have an award actually that we give at the Radio Club annual banquet, that it recognizes the activities of Richard DeMello, who was the FCCA coordinator and helped us to bring the coordinators into the whole process. So that was some of the big things that we were doing. We also were looking at a lot of the 911 issues. We had several projects that were looking at different things within comm centers. But in APCO, we have a lot of committees, and the committees primarily do the work within the committees unless it's turned into a project. And then the project gives it a designation, has a whole another way of working. And so we had several of those going on. And I was kind of in the middle of PISWAC was my really big thing that I was engaged with, because that took up an entire year. And the year before I was president, the current president was Ross Morris, and Ross broke his leg or foot or something, and he couldn't get around very good. And so my year that I was vice president, I picked up a lot of the work that he was doing. When you're president of APCO, you do a lot of going to different conferences throughout the country. You meet a lot at the FCC, to do those kind of things. We were out on the Hill a lot for different issues that involve public safety. So it's a lot of running around. The whole month of May, I wasn't even home. It's just a lot of work. People that APCO was structured at the time a little different than it's structured today. The officers were really doing all of the legwork in those days.
So, Marilyn, let's go through some of the acronyms. Let's start with APCO.
Association of Public Safety Communications Officials.
Okay.
I don't even know if that's the current one, because they've changed it so many times.
All right, let's
was what
go.
it was then.
Okay, let's go on to NIPSTC.
National Public Safety Telecommunications Council.
All right, and then the PISWAC.
The Public Safety Wireless Advisory Committee.
Okay, and did I miss any other acronyms that you may have talked about?
NENA is the National Emergency Number Association. They're primarily a 911 organization. That's what they focus on entirely. APCO is much more broad-based than just 911. APCO deals on spectrum issues, 911 issues, comm centers issue. Right now, APCO is working to get telecommunicators considered as first responders on, and they're starting to really gain some traction on the Hill with this too. They have some legislation, and they're starting to get some signers on. So they're very engaged in a lot of things where NENA is primarily 911.
Okay. Any other acronyms we may have touched on?
I think those were the big ones.
Okay. And I want to encourage our participants and the members and our guests to put any questions that you have for Marilyn in the chat, and Barney will keep track of the chat, or even in the Q&A, and we'll pause here in a little bit to give Marilyn some questions. When you think about spectrum issues, I mean, you didn't, go to school for radio. This kind of grew on you, and over your career, you went kind of in stages, but now, when you were leading APCO and then your involvement with NIPSTC, where did you get all your radio background?
I was scared to death when I was first starting to attend APCO meetings, and the gentleman who was my mentor and who was also in charge he was the clerk of the court. They moved over to communications. His name was Gil Lineberry. Some of your viewers that are old school may even know Gil. He also was a ham operator. He worked with the Navy Mars group, and very active in the club as far as the Navy Mars group especially. And Gil was one of those guys that you just meet once in a lifetime. He saw something that he felt like he could he could do something with, I guess, and took me under his wing. And I was very scared because I really didn't understand anything. I come from the dispatcher side where the technicians would come in and talk about sunspots, and we all thought they were full of baloney, you know. What are they talking about? They're just telling us this, you know. So I really didn't believe much of what they were telling us because it didn't make any sense from a dispatcher's perspective. And he tried his best to help me to understand. We used to do once we had all non-sworn people in there and we really had a crew to train us. He used to have like an annual getaway with us. And literally we would bring whiteboards and he would teach us about RF and how the towers work and how the signals come. That was all something that was just not in my bailiwick. I was like a training supervisor and not really into all of that. And when I first doing training, and that was my primarily my focus. And when I got asked to run for the national APCO, I was like, you got to be kidding me. I don't know any of this stuff. And he worked really hard. So I didn't have any formal education other than his work. And he gave me the amateur radio book to learn and to read and to try to help to understand, to take the radio test. And he really worked hard with not only me, but there was several of us that really didn't have any background. I don't know if you know Tom Sorley, or maybe some of the viewers know Tom Sorley. I was Tom's mentor. And Tom came up, I hired him at the Orlando Police Department. And he was a kind of a smart aleck young guy when we first hired him. And Gil was still there, and I was the hiring and training supervisor at the time. And we saw a lot in Tom, even as a young guy. He was in his early 20s, and he picked this stuff up fast. Very bright guy, and so he was a big help even for me at that time. And then my friend Harlan McEwen, has been a really big impact on my career. Harlan and I made friends back in the 90s when I was on the APCO board in Piswak, and I met him there. And we kind of hung out together all these years. And Harlan was a big, really taught me a lot about broadband on the broadband side. How all of that was going to be able to work, because we had several deals that we were in the middle of with Spectrum and exchanges and things that we were working on over the years. And so I've always had help. I certainly don't know it all. I relied on people who I trusted, and I have a lot of good friends and that I can pick up the phone. Always felt like I had a terrific support system. I certainly didn't go to school to learn any of it. And Bob Gerst was the attorney at APCO, and I had a wonderful relationship with Bob and was very comfortable with dealing with him. And you know, I'm kind of one of those strategic thinkers, kind of out of the box people that is really good bringing groups together and talking about things. But I never put myself out as an expert at that at all, and never would.
Well, it worked.
Yeah.
And that's the bottom line. You know, it worked, and that is such a great story. Barney, why don't we take a couple of the questions out of the chat? And I know somebody raised their hand too, but please put your questions in the chat, and Barney will give them to Marilyn. And go ahead, Barney, with a question.
Okay, Marilyn, make sure my audio's on. One of the sort of the radio questions is, how is 5G going to be utilized for public safety? And is there a set-aside spectrum for public safety in that range?
I didn't, the first part was all muddled up.
Okay, I'm sorry. How is 5G going to be utilized for public safety? And is there a set-aside spectrum for public safety in the 5G range?
Yeah, I'm sure we'll use it. You know, I mean, we're all about video, and we're all about, now we're certainly have more activity with 911, and hopefully we're moving into next generation 911. As far as the set aside goes, I don't really think there is. Can't really answer that. I have not been involved there. I don't know.
Okay. Looks like we may have lost Tim briefly. Marilyn, are you still there? Okay. Let me go on with another question then.
I am. Mm-hmm.
Let's go back to EPCO. The question is, EPCO basically represent police, fire, and EMS agency in terms of spectrum needs and training and dispatchers? That's sort of the question. Is there anything that they're missing from that statement?
Yes, I think they're definitely working very hard within the telecommunicator groups, the 911 groups. They certainly have EMS people that are engaged with them, police, fire, EMS. They're primarily focused on those different groups. That's one of the differences between APCO and NIPSTIC, in that NIPSTIC has 16 kind of varied groups. We have the forestry and highway people, and the state telecommunicate supervisors, and we have all these different groups. APCO is primarily, I mean, they're been, when I was working with APCO, and I'm sure they still have a good relationship with the alarm industry. And the alarm industry has been very active with APCO for a long time because of the relationship between alarms and 911 centers. So I would say that that's their primary focus, but there certainly is other groups that participate. APCO is the largest group, public safety group, and communications, and they have a lot of people that go to their conferences that aren't even really, within that group. They just want to be involved. So yeah, I think that's probably a true statement, but we have to always look at the telecommunicators as being something that they're working really hard for. Really problems with recruiting in telecommunications, and they do a great deal of training in their institute. They're engaged in spectrum issues for all of those different groups.
Go ahead with another question, Barney.
Okay, there are two questions here sort of interrelated. The more generic, the more broader one is, what is the role of amateur radio in organizations? Let's start with that one. That's sort of a broader statement for question.
Well, amateur radio, not just in the organizations, but in public safety. When I was with Orange County, after I retired from the Orlando Police Department, I went over to the county and managed their 911 and radio systems. And in the Emergency Operations Center, we had a specially located place for our hams. They are really a critical part. I lived through the hurricanes when we had 4 hurricanes come through Florida, 4, and we couldn't have done it without those guys. So there's always been a relationship between ham operators and APCO, and on the ground, more important relationship between the people that actually manage communication centers and provide emergency operations during emergencies that require some backup. And the hams have always been our backup. So I know they participate a lot. We have the ARRL in NIPSTIC, And I know that the guys from there also go to the APCOs, the APCO conference, and are involved in the APCO conferences too.
May I follow? I'll follow up with the next question, sort of a more specific example. And it is, are there any examples of amateur and professional interoperability in the United States that stand out in shining star for public service interoperability? And where are they located? And can you talk about how that relationship blossomed?
I do not know anything I can quote on that, of any particular one in Orange County when I relationship. But I don't know what interoperability is kind of used for a lot of different definitions. Radio interoperability and people and organizational interoperability. I'm not really sure which one to focus on here, but I know as far as the people go, in many jurisdictions, there's relationships. I do not know of anything in particular to be able to speak to, except for where I come from in Orange County.
Can you give an example there
We
that stands out?
Yeah, well, I just mentioned all these hurricanes. We absolutely participated together. We lost, we didn't lose our radio system, thank goodness, but we lost all other kind of communications. And we used the ham operators. We had a whole command center set up, and they worked side by side with us. So everybody was on the same page. You know, I don't think you could ask for anything better than that kind of relationship we had.
Any other questions, Barney?
Yeah, one just popped up. It's sort of a more recent one. You spoke about 911 alarm system providers. Now we have the newest thing, the consumer video doorbells. And is that creating anything either good or bad in the public service area with all these doorbells out there recording videos?
Yeah, well, video was, when we first started talking about video, all of us who had to worry about records retention were shaking in our boots. How are we ever going to retain all of this video? And you know, there's still discussion about that for long-term video use as we move into 911. But the doorbells are a good thing. I mean, they're used by detectives. We've used them many times, so they're not a bad thing. But you know, the problem is that sometimes you can't find people even though you've got them on videos, and people get frustrated because they've put these bells in. But they're not a bad thing at all, and they're not a problem. I think that detectives primarily will use them more than anybody in communications would, other than initially on first response.
You have any other questions there, Barney?
Well, none popped up. I came up with a couple myself, though, if I may.
Sure.
I'm not sure which direction to go first here. If you could predict what public safety is going to be like in another 10 years, could you foresee anything that is not currently available that would be happening in 10 years from now, or 15 years, or even 5 years from now? Do you have any dreams or predictions of what we're going to see?
We actually have done a follow-up. I talked about PISWAC before. We did a follow-up out to 2020 in NIPSTIC to look at the future for us. And we are just now reorganizing to look at 2030. So we'll be talking about that very soon as we get that group together. Basically, nobody really thought we would be as quickly into talking about 5G, and actually 6G discussions are going on. So I know when we sat down the first time in PISWAC and they said, well, tell us where you think you're going to be in 10 years. It was just like the Wild Wild West. Nobody had any idea. We were just kind of throwing out crazy ideas. You know what? I think we'll be you know, if the funding comes along and keep public safety in check with what happened with everybody else, but what ends up happening in government and public safety is that we're not the first out of the chute by any means. Our funding lags behind. I mean, just like NG 911, how many years have we been talking about NG 911? And how many years have we talked about Z-Access? I mean, Z-Access was like looking at 30 years in the future. And now here we sit, and the FCC is just coming out and coming down on carriers to finally give it to us. And FirstNet is doing that. And so if we keep up with everybody else, we'll probably be in a totally different environment than we are now. I can't predict that. I'm not smart enough to do that, but I hope that we're able to stay up economically with any of the changes as they come. I mean, who will be the last ones to get 5G, 6G will be public safety. So our broadband network that will be able to stay up better than we have in the past, that's for sure.
So Barney, let's take just a little bit of a break from questions. And Marilyn, I want to shift gears into the Radio Club of America and talk about when you joined, talk about, what got you interested in joining the Radio Club of America, and then talk about some of the leadership positions in the Radio Club of America that you've been a part of.
Well, I love Fred Link. I was at a meeting that Fred Link was at, and at the time I was on the board of APCO, and Fred invited me to stay at the athletic club in New York City. Now, I was new to the board. I didn't travel a lot, and I was very new to the whole APCO processes. Get you a place at the athletic club, and come and see what we do. And Fred got me involved. I loved going. I was just enamored with the talent in the room. It's just, I still am. I go to these conferences and these the dinners and the speakers and the people in the room. I mean, these are the people that were the first people involved. And Marconi's daughter was at one of our dinners, and I just was so touched by all of that I thought, well, this is a group I'd like to really be involved with. So I went ahead and I started on the board and ran for a position on the Radio Club board, and I really enjoyed doing that. And I did the fellows. I worked with the fellows and helped out with that part of the conference, with the conference. Carol, she does is the future of the club. Myself personally, she bringing in young people and getting young people involved. So I always felt like I was just surrounded by the cream of the crop. The radio club, the people that are engaged in the club, the active people work very hard for the club. Now, I always really enjoyed my time being involved. We went to the club because there's so many public safety people that are engaged, and asked if we could give our highest award, which is the Richard DeMello Award, during the awards banquet. And we advertised the club on our site, and vice versa. And we've done that now for many years. And before all this COVID business and all this happened, we usually used to have 2 or 3 tables of public safety people for NIPSTIC, and then APCO had some tables. So we really brought a lot, and it's just really a great group to participate with. I feel like it was kind of a pinnacle of the things that I'd had an opportunity to do in my career, was participate with the club.
Well, and it's so great, Marilyn, that you became a director, and was a great way to give back to RCA and to the membership. And I know I speak for all the current board and past board members that your service was just excellent and a real value to RCA. And of course, we look forward to seeing you at the next banquet, which we hope will be this November out in Denver. And but thank you so much for recapping your life with RCA. And once you become a member of RCA,
You're in.
you're in. And it is a fabulous group of people. And you're right, it's the best of the best. And so I encourage anyone who is watching tonight. We're talking to Marilyn Ward. And if you're not a member of RCA, go to the website and join up. And you can use me or Marilyn or Barney as a sponsor and join the oldest wireless club in the world. It's just phenomenal. Started in 1909.
Most people don't realize that the club does all of these scholarships. I mean, when I got involved, that was one of the things that I found really quite exciting, is that there's just so many things that the club does for people within our community that are interested in radio, that are RF people, and just some great stories coming out of people that the club helped. And so it's definitely, I would encourage anybody that is not already a member to join, that's for sure.
Thank you, Marilyn, for that. And Barney, back down to you for some more questions.
Okay, there are two questions here that really are dealing with video, more so from the out in the field to the dispatchers. The one area is as far as, is 911 going to be impacted with the use of GPS phones and mobile video phones? And then as far as the police having video cams, do those particular uses of video going to affect public service at all?
It's going to affect dispatchers, that's for sure. It affect the comm centers, definitely. I mean, this is going to change the way that they function. We have several groups that are, Terry Hall, past president of APCO, his organization has already moved forward, and it's been a whole, it's a whole different thing. A lot of folks have talked about creating just like a video unit within the comm center. Once everybody gets going. I was asked a question today that I really don't feel like I haven't managed a 911 center in a while, about how 911 centers are going to end up being able to do this. I mean, we always, and it continues today, suffer from shortages of people. I mean, if you know somebody that's a great waitress, tell her to go apply for 911. I mean, people who are outgoing, gregarious people, they do very well in 911. They're just constantly recruiting and training. And now we're going to be adding a different level, a whole different level with volumes. People are so comfortable taking video on their phone and with text to 911 and shooting videos in. It's going to definitely change the way that people, or the call centers work. And I think it'll end up the work that the dispatchers do. I don't know how we're going to end up, how it's going to end up, and people will probably try different ways, whether they'll create a video group or create some mechanism for that to happen. The body cam is going on now, and you can see what happens. I mean, back in the day, we used to have a week to get out any kind of telephone calls or something, and then it got crunched down to, well, try to get the calls out for the news people in 3 days or something. What happens now when there's something that the news people want? They want it today. They want it right now. They want the body cam, and you hear them complain every night on the network news if it's a hot item and they don't have the body cam. It takes staffing to be able to pull all that together and weed through all of that you get in. I mean, it creates a whole different environment than we ever have dealt with in the past. So yeah, I think it'll affect it.
Barney, more questions?
Yeah, going back to something you had mentioned earlier, you had mentioned Next Gen 911. So the question came up as how widely is that been adopted? And then you also mentioned something that I didn't understand what you're saying. You mentioned Z access. Could you explain how wide Next Gen 911 is and what is Z access?
Yeah, it's another one of those acronyms you just talk about and don't realize that you're Z access is location, so that when you call 911 on a cell phone, we know where to go. And if you're in a multi-story building that has, you know, elevators going up, and what floor are you on, what room are you in? There's some technology. There's a group called NextNav out now, and I believe that's who's providing it for AT&T. There's a whole new way of measuring that. In the old days, when we had landlines, the line told you where the call was coming from. Cell phones totally changed that, and we've been trying since cell phones came out to get correct location information, and Z access is what they call, that's the acronym we all use for location of where the call is coming from, whether it be on the ground floor, the 5th floor, whereabouts in the building. Several different terms have been used and different discussions have occurred. Some call dispatchable location. There's Z access is kind of what we use to denote the location, whether it be floor level or street level, wherever the call is coming from a cell phone.
Following up on that, another question popped up about this exact thing you're talking about is with the predominance of voice over internet phones and cell phones. Are there challenges that are coming about because of all that? One of the questions came up as you discussed the challenges from internet phones and voice over internet phones. What kind of challenges have those presented as far as locating the callers?
Yeah, it is a big challenge. I mean, that's one of the big things that we've been working for many, many years, to try and be able to get technology that will give us the location of the caller.
Are there solutions on the horizon?
There are. I think it's barometric, some NextNav is using, and there's different, some technologies are through the handset, some are through the network. We're working, I mean, we have some solutions now, but it's not all, they're not implemented, and they're not all in agreement with how it's going to work. So hopefully there's to get this done and tested by next year. So we're praying that we'll end up being able to see that happening. I mean, back when cell phones first came out, it was just not uncommon for us at my PSAP, the 911 center in Orlando, to get calls from the Space Center and talking about problems and accident over at the Space Center, because the call just like bounced over all these towers and landed in ours. I actually put together a group to do testing when after I was still with NIPSTIC, but this I did on my own when I was employed by Orange County as their 911 person, to go out, and we bought a bunch of different cell phones ourselves. And when we went out, just real people, we got in our cars and we drove around and we called on 911. We had it set up within our call centers within the counties. And we would call live people testing. Most of the testing is done by computers and that, but we had people out doing it. And it was quite an eye opener of how the calls were bounced from one tower to another and end up in whole nother counties. So that still is a problem. IP has changed things, obviously, because you're not going through the same type of a network. So we have high hopes that this will be resolved soon. It's the problem has existed for many, 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 many years.
More questions, Barney?
Yeah, sort of shifting gears a little bit. Can you comment on the new regulations requiring 911 centers to be tied into the National Suicide Prevention Hotline?
Yeah, I probably shouldn't be the one to do that because I'm not managing a center right now, so I can't give you any daily, I'll put my old comm center manager hat on. Because we're 24/7 places, we get all kinds of responsibilities. We have problems with no people and terrific attrition and all of that. But every time something comes up that needs to have 24-hour people, it ends up in the communication center. And it just adds another responsibility on with all the things that we're talking about coming up here with new technologies. It's an important thing and it needs to be done. I just I'm not on a daily basis working to see how it's impacting them in a live environment.
Keep going, Barney.
Well, there was a compliment here. Someone made the comment, would have enjoyed working for Marilyn due to her broader people experiences. So that was sort of a compliment to you, Marilyn. I will throw that out. I have one here that I thought of myself, actually. I hate to throw my own in here. But one of the things I dug up a few interviews with you prior to this tonight, and something has not come up tonight, but your experience as a female in this field. Can you give any advice to women trying to get into this field?
Yeah, I could from way back when. I'm hoping it's better now. But one of the reasons that I ran for the APCO board when had never been, I'm the first woman to be elected to an APCO board member, was really the story. I'll tell you the story. I was in the vendor room. May, the lady from the airport, she was a female, and another lady from the city of Orlando. I was the city then, and it was 5 women, all friends from APCO, Florida, that we hung out together. And so we were walking around the vendor room at an APCO conference together, and we couldn't get anybody to talk to us. We could not get anybody to talk to us. And we all had, I had, $10 million, and then she had $6 million and another one. We all had millions of dollars to be buying a new 800 megahertz radio system. This was back in the, 90s, early 90s. And so we thought something was weird. And we went into one of the larger booths in the middle of the floor, and we could not get one person. There was no females working in the booth then. And we couldn't get anybody to wait on us. So this guy was telling you about Gil, that was my mentor and my boss. I found him and I said, go through that booth and see if anybody will talk to you. I see what happens. So he did. I had been being asked to get involved, and I thought, I think I'm going to go and talk to the people at the commercial advisory group. So I butted into their meeting. They didn't have me on their agenda, but I brought me and the other 4 women from Central Florida, and we went into the meeting and told them this story. And interestingly enough, when we were said goodbye to the meeting, we were dismissed with a thank you, girls. And as we walked out the door, there was several companies that had women in that meeting. And those women, we were pretty shocked. They flocked out the door and they said, thank you, thank you, thank you for coming and talking about this. So that was from the women's perspective in the industry, that we're happy that we were truthful, came and told them our experience. And it also made me go ahead and run for the board of APCO. And I ran against 2 other, and I was able to be able to win that. So that's kind of what started me doing being in the national scene. I think it's better now. I hope it's better now, because now, I mean, back then you did not have women in communications hardly. I mean, you have a lot of Vivian Cars that were engaged, but on the public safety side, we didn't have that many communications at all. I pretty much had the whole Florida crowd with me when we were there that night.
So, Barney, a final question for Marilyn.
Okay. Well, I'm trying to figure out one that's here. I sort of came up, I thought of one myself. I'll have to throw these out. But in your current role, you are executive director of NIPSI, right?
NIPSTIC, yes.
NIPSTIC.
Could you define what you think the greatest accomplishment that organization's had since you've been involved in it? Is there one that stands out?
Kind of blurred out toward the end. I think you said that since I've been involved in it.
Right. Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
I think the greatest thing that we've done is bring organizations together that would not have ever talked to each other about their filings at the FCC. Some filings were in conflict with one another. Everybody was trying to get the attention for public safety, but there was never one place that the FCC could look and see where is the majority of the groups on this issue. And that's really what we came together for. We call it collaborative leadership. And that's been our biggest accomplishment, is really being able to do that. Now, over the years, we, particularly an issue like Project 25, that was quite divisive. We kind of danced around some of those issues, and we only commented on the things that we could find agreement on. All of our organizations, have 16 organizations. We have a whole bunch of associate organizations and liaison organizations. The only voters are the public safety organizations that are the 16 voting members. And so when we file something, we have agreement on what that filing is. If one of the organizations wants to have a footnote in there that they have a problem with a certain specific thing, then we're happy to do that. But generally, all of our filings are collaborative, and that's a difficult thing to do, particularly when we first got together, when we were all over the place in conflict with one another in our particular FCC filings and going to Congress. That's a big one. We also, like I said, we wrote we've really gotten into requirements, and we wrote the requirements for the now you know it as FirstNet. And we've written many other requirement documents for different aspects of broadband, and we've been very engaged with that. So I'm very proud of what we've been able to accomplish with a bunch of volunteers. It's been excellent.
Well, Marilyn, thank you so much for coming on tonight. This is the Radio Club of America interview series. Next month, it will be the networking series. And of course, the networking series is an opportunity for RCA members only to get together and go through ideas that might develop other business relationships and other interests within the Radio Club of America. I want to thank Marilyn for coming tonight and telling her story. I'd also like to thank Barney Scholl for his help with the Q&A and so many other things that Barney and the rest of the directors and officers of the Radio Club of America and all the good work that is done If you're not a member, go to radioclubofamerica.org and sign up. It's time to get and become a member and really experience all the valuable history and all the valuable members that are part of the radio club. So Marilyn, thanks very much. We
Thank
wish you the best. Keep going, keep your foot on the gas, and we'll see you soon.
Okay, thanks so much. Have a good night.
Good night.
And thanks to all of you for watching this evening, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, Barney.
You're welcome, Tim.